Okay, so you want to own a data center. Server racks humming in a climate controlled room, AI companies paying you a reliable check every month just to keep their machines running, the entire internet's traffic flowing through fiber lines you own. The cloud has to live somewhere, and whoever owns that somewhere gets paid, at scale, without lifting a finger. That's what the pitch deck says. That's what the infrastructure investment brochure is designed to make you feel. But here's what neither one shows you: the power utility that won't connect you to the grid for 4 years, the $100 million in construction costs you committed before a single customer signed a lease, the cooling system that failed during the first summer heat wave, and the hyperscale tenant who showed up wanting 100 megawatts, handed you a contract priced below your cost of capital, and walked where you wouldn't sign it. Data center ownership is one of the most capital intensive and least understood business models in technology. From the outside, it looks like a utility with guaranteed demand. From the inside, it's a business where the upfront costs are measured in hundreds of millions. The biggest input variable is a commodity you can't hedge, and your best customers have more negotiating leverage over you than you have over them. Some data centers make serious money. Some quietly consume capital while their owners wait for the next lease to fix everything. And some have destroyed investors who went in without understanding what they were actually building. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how data center economics work, why the businesses that succeed are almost never who you'd expect, and what the AI boom actually means for anyone thinking about owning one. Before we talk about money, we need to talk about what a data center actually is. Because data center is one of those terms that gets used to describe about six completely different businesses that happen to involve computer hardware in a building. A co-location facility, called a colo in the industry, is the most common model for independent ownership. You build the building, you supply the power, the cooling, and the physical network infrastructure. Your customers bring their own servers and pay you a monthly fee for the space and the infrastructure to run them. You're a landlord for computer equipment. The customer owns what's inside the cage. You own everything else. A wholesale or hyperscale facility does something structurally similar, but at a scale that changes every single economic variable. Instead of renting individual server cabinets to hundreds of smaller customers, you lease entire floors or entire buildings to one company. Typically Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or one of their infrastructure competitors. They fill it with their own hardware. Your margins are thinner. Your customer concentration is higher. Your leases are longer. And whether the facility is financially durable depends almost entirely on whether that one customer renews. An enterprise or private data center is built by a corporation for its own exclusive use. A major bank, a hospital network, a federal agency. They're not in the data center business. They're in banking or healthcare or government. And the data center is infrastructure overhead, not a revenue-generating asset. These facilities exist outside the market you can own and operate. An edge data center is a smaller facility, sometimes just a handful of racks in a repurposed building, located physically close to where data is being consumed rather than in a centralized hub. The logic is latency. Get the processing close enough to the end user, and you can run real-time applications that the round-trip delay to a distant data center would otherwise make impossible. These are proliferating, but the economics are different from everything else, with smaller scale and more distributed management. And then there's what the industry in 2026 calls the AI data center. This isn't a marketing category. A facility built around GPU clusters, the hardware that trains and runs large artificial intelligence models, operates at power densities that are 3 to 8 times higher than traditional server environments. A standard server rack in a traditional data center might draw 10 to 20 kilowatts. A rack of AI training hardware can draw 40 to 100 kilowatts. The cooling and electrical infrastructure requirements are fundamentally different. The reason this taxonomy matters is that the economics of these models are almost completely different from each other. A retail colocation facility and a hyperscale wholesale facility both contain server hardware, but one generates $150 to $300 per kilowatt per month from hundreds of customers. The other generates $70 to $100 per kilowatt per month from one customer who negotiated hard and can walk away when the lease expires. Same physical building, completely different business. The way a boutique hotel and a long-term apartment building are both real estate but have almost nothing in common operationally or financially. This video focuses on the colocation model, the one most people picture when they think about owning a data center, while explaining where the other models fit. The co-location model is where independent ownership is actually possible, and it's the model where most of the financial surprises live. The single most important decision in data center development isn't your pricing model, or your customer strategy, or your operational team. It's where you build. And the three things that determine whether a location works are power, connectivity, and land. In that order, power comes first because a data center is, at its core, a power delivery and management system. Everything else, the cooling, the security, the connectivity, exists to support getting electricity to compute hardware and removing the heat that electricity generates. A retail colocation facility might run 1 to 20 megawatts of IT load. A single hyperscale campus might need 100 to 500 megawatts. For context, 1 megawatt of continuous power is enough to supply roughly 750 to 1,000 average American homes on an ongoing basis. But the constraint isn't the cost of power. The constraint is whether you can get it at all, on any timeline that makes a development project viable. Power utility interconnection queues across the United States have stretched to lengths that were unimaginable a decade ago. In PJM, the grid operator covering the Mid-Atlantic and parts of the Midwest, the average wait time to get a large new load connected to the grid has extended past 5 years. MISO, which covers the Midwest and portions of the South, is similar. In some markets, you can't get a grid connection within any development timeline that makes financial sense because the queue is already full and new additions keep pushing the back of it further. This is the defining constraint of new data center development in 2026. Not the cost of construction, not the availability of customers. The power utility interconnection queue. The grid was designed for a different era of demand, and permitting and constructing new transmission and substation infrastructure takes longer than building the facility you're trying to power. The markets where power is accessible and affordable at data center scale are well known inside the industry. Northern Virginia, specifically Loudoun County, is the largest data center market in the world, with more than 3,000 megawatts of commissioned capacity and more under construction. It reached that scale because Dominion Energy made large grid connections available at competitive rates for years. That window is significantly narrower now. The county itself has imposed restrictions on new data center development in some zones because the concentration of facilities has strained local infrastructure. Other established markets include Dallas, Phoenix, Chicago, Atlanta, and Silicon Valley, each with different trade-offs on power cost, availability, land price, and the local fiber ecosystem. Central Oregon and parts of the Pacific Northwest attracted hyperscalers early because cheap hydroelectric power and a cool climate both reduce operating costs in measurable ways. Connectivity is the second factor, and it's more nuanced than it looks from outside the industry. A data center that isn't connected to multiple independent fiber networks has limited commercial value. But the more important dimension isn't just being connected, it's the density of who else is connected. The value of a colocation facility increases dramatically with the number of network providers present in the building because customers can connect directly to different carriers and exchange directly to different carriers and exchange traffic with other companies in the building without that traffic leaving the facility. The industry calls this neutral interconnection. When a bank wants to connect to its cloud provider and both are in your building, the connection stays inside your walls. You charge for it monthly, every month, indefinitely. This creates a compounding dynamic. More networks in the building attract more customers. More customers attract more networks. The companies that have built these ecosystems in the right markets, Equinix most prominently, have spent 25 years creating interconnection density that a new entrant in a new market cannot replicate in the first few years of operation, no matter how well they execute. Land is third, and it constrains differently than most people expect. Raw land price is rarely the binding problem. What's binding is zoning, utility access, flood risk classification, and physical access for heavy equipment. A data center needs to be on stable ground, outside floodplains, close enough to a major fiber corridor to connect cost-effectively, and in a location where local zoning permits the combination of industrial-scale power consumption, continuous diesel generator testing, and the cooling infrastructure needed for a large facility. In several of the markets that matter, those requirements eliminate most of the available parcels before you've looked at a single price. The practical conclusion: land in markets where data center economics work is expensive because everyone already figured those markets out. The cheap land is cheap because it has a power problem, a connectivity problem, or a zoning problem that makes it unsuitable for this use. So you found your market. The power commitment is in place. Fiber is in the ground nearby. You've secured the land. Now you build. This is the section that either creates discipline or causes disasters, because data center construction economics are unlike what new entrants to the industry expect, and the surprises almost always run in one direction. The fundamental unit of data center construction economics is the megawatt. How many megawatts of IT load capacity will the facility support? Everything else, the building size, the cooling systems, the electrical infrastructure, gets engineered and sized around that target. The general industry rule of thumb for new construction in the United States is approximately $7 million to $12 million per megawatt of IT capacity, all in, including land, shell building, and all critical facility systems. A 10 megawatt facility, which is on the smaller end of what's commercially meaningful as a standalone colocation business, costs somewhere between $70 million and $120 million to develop from scratch. And that range assumes relatively normal market conditions. Post-COVID supply chain disruptions pushed construction costs and timelines meaningfully higher across the board. Some developers found themselves with buildings that were structurally complete but couldn't open because critical electrical equipment was still on a ship. Walk through what you're actually committing to. The shell building. A data center isn't standard commercial construction. It requires reinforced floor loading for equipment that weighs considerably more than office furniture, raised floors or overhead cable management for power and data cabling, a specialized fire suppression system that won't damage servers in the event of a discharge, and a structural design that allows future expansion of capacity without taking the operational portion of the building offline. A purpose-built 10 megawatt data center covering 50,000 to 80,000 square feet of white space might cost $15 million to $30 million just for the building structure, depending on the market and the design specifications. The electrical infrastructure is the largest single line item, and the one that catches people who haven't built in this sector before. You need utility feeders from the grid, medium voltage switchgear to distribute power through the building at manageable voltages, uninterruptible power supply systems that bridge the gap between a utility outage and the generators starting up, and diesel backup generators sized to carry the full IT load through a multi-hour or multi-day outage. For a 10 megawatt facility, the electrical infrastructure alone runs $20 million to $40 million, and you're almost certainly building redundant utility feeds from two separate substations, because a single point of failure in the electrical path is commercially unacceptable for any enterprise customer with a meaningful SLA requirement. The cooling systems account for a major portion of both capital cost and ongoing operating expense. Every kilowatt of power running through a server generates a kilowatt of heat that has to leave the building continuously, 24 hours a day. Traditional precision air cooling units, hot aisle and cold aisle containment systems, and the liquid cooling infrastructure increasingly required for high-density GPU workloads each have different cost structures and different performance characteristics. Cooling infrastructure for a 10 megawatt facility typically runs $10 million to $20 million to $20 million in capital costs. The physical connectivity infrastructure, the fiber distribution inside the building, the meet me room, where customers connect their networks to each other, and the switching and routing equipment adds another $5 million to $10 million for a facility that wants to compete as a neutral interconnection hub rather than just warehouse space with power. Add it up, and you're looking at $70 million to $120 million before the first customer installs a server, before you've signed a single lease, before you've collected a dollar of revenue. And the timeline from the decision to build to the day you can actually put customers in the building runs 24 to 36 months in most markets, and longer when permitting gets complicated or equipment lead times extend. That last point deserves its own attention, because equipment lead times have become one of the most underestimated risks in data center development. A large power transformer, the kind needed to step down utility voltage to the distribution level a data center uses, historically took 3 to 6 months to procure. Between 2021 and 2024, those lead times extended to 2 years or more for certain configurations. The manufacturers, most of which are outside the United States, couldn't produce them fast enough to meet demand. Uninterruptible power supply systems and precision cooling equipment faced similar backlogs. This matters because of how data center construction is financed. Developers use a combination of equity and construction debt. Construction debt costs money every month it's outstanding. If your project slips from 24 months to 36 months because a transformer is sitting in a queue somewhere, You've added $7 million in interest carry to your cost structure on a $100 million project at 7% interest, and you've delayed your revenue start by a full year. What experienced developers learned during that supply chain disruption is that you order long lead equipment before the building design is finalized. In some cases, before you have a customer committed to the space, you're committing $20 million to $30 million to electrical equipment on a speculative basis because waiting for certainty means your schedule slips enough to cost more than the procurement risk you were trying to avoid. The revenue model for a colocation data center is simpler on the surface than it looks, but the unit economics have more leverage in both directions than it looks from the outside. You're selling three things: space, measured in cabinet units or square feet of raised floor; power, the primary unit of value, measured in kilowatts of committed capacity; and connectivity, meaning the ability to exchange data with other customers in the building, priced as monthly cross-connect fees. The pricing unit that drives everything is the monthly cost per kilowatt. Retail colocation in established markets runs $150 to $300 per kilowatt per month. A customer that needs 10 kilowatts of power capacity pays you $1,500 to $3,000 each month for that space, plus whatever connectivity services they use. In a market with strong enterprise demand and limited competitive supply, pricing sits toward the top of that range. In a market with new supply entering faster than demand is growing, pricing gets competed down. A 10-megawatt colocation facility at full occupancy, priced at a blended average of $200 per kilowatt monthly, generates $24 million of annual recurring revenue. That math looks clean until you understand what full occupancy actually requires. New data centers don't lease up quickly. The typical trajectory for a new facility in an established market runs 3 to 5 years from opening to meaningful occupancy. During those years, you're carrying the full fixed cost structure of the building, the full operating cost of running a 24-hour operation, and the full debt service on the construction financing on partial revenue. A facility at 30% occupancy in year 1 and 55% in year 2 looks nothing like the fully occupied model that justified the investment. The wholesale or hyperscale model changes the unit economics in ways that cut both directions. A hyperscale customer might lease 50 to 100 megawatts at a time, filling a facility that would take years to lease to retail customers. But they're not paying $200 per kilowatt. Wholesale rates in established markets run $70 to $100 per kilowatt per month for large commitments, and sometimes lower for very large or long-term deals. The deal is bigger, the lease is longer. The margin per kilowatt is substantially thinner. The trade-off is revenue predictability. A 10-year wholesale lease with a creditworthy counterparty is a fundamentally different financial profile from 500 small retail customers, any one of whom can give 90-day notice and take their servers somewhere else. Large operators manage this by blending wholesale and retail exposure across their portfolios so that no single customer departure destroys the financial plan. Interconnection revenue is a profit center that operators outside the traditional colocation space consistently underestimate, and it's worth spending a moment on it because it illustrates something important about the colocation model. Every time two customers in your building want to exchange network traffic directly, they pay you a monthly fee for the physical cross-connect, the fiber or copper cable that runs between their equipment. Established colocation operators charge roughly $500 to $1,000 per cross-connect per month. At a mature facility hosting thousands of customers with tens of thousands of active cross-connects, this becomes meaningful revenue at almost zero incremental cost. You're not delivering a service, you're maintaining a cable. Cross-connect relationships are also sticky in a way that monthly server leases are not. Once two businesses have built their network architectures around a connection inside your building, the cost and operational disruption of moving that connection elsewhere is significant. That's the kind of revenue a facility owner wants: recurring, predictable, and genuinely costly to the customer to cancel. But the interconnection flywheel only builds at a mature facility in a market with dense fiber presence. A new facility in a secondary market doesn't have it on day one, and it takes years to develop. Here's the structural problem at the heart of colocation economics, and it's the one thing that separates people who understand this business from people who are surprised by their financial statements 3 years in. Your revenue is measured in kilowatts of committed capacity. Your largest cost is also measured in kilowatts, but the math between those two numbers is not symmetric, and the gap between them is where a lot of the margin variability lies. Power is the largest single operating cost for most colocation operators, representing 30 to 50% of total operating expenses. The reason it's not symmetric with revenue is a metric called power usage effectiveness, or PUE. When a customer buys 10 kilowatts of committed capacity, they're paying for 10 kilowatts delivered to their servers. But to deliver that 10 kilowatts, a facility actually consumes more than 10 kilowatts in total because the cooling systems, the lighting, the UPS losses, and the power distribution equipment all consume electricity too. PUE is the ratio of total facility power consumed to IT power delivered. A facility with a PUE of 1.5 consumes 1.5 kilowatts for every 1 kilowatt it delivers to customer equipment. A facility with a PUE of 1.1 consumes 1.1. The Uptime Institute's annual Global Data Center Survey puts the industry average at approximately 1.5. Hyperscalers like Google have reported PUEs in the range of 1.1 to 1.15 for their purpose-built facilities. That gap is not abstract. On a 10 megawatt 1T load, a PUE of 1.5 means you're consuming 15 megawatts and paying for all 15. At 6 cents per kilowatt hour, that's an annualized power bill of approximately $7.9 million. Drop to a PUE of 1.1 and the same IT load costs $5.8 million in power annually. The difference is $2.1 million per year on the same 10 megawatt facility from nothing other than how efficiently you move heat out of the building. Older facilities in warm climates often run PUEs above 1.6. New facilities designed with hot aisle containment and the ability to use outside back for free cooling during cooler months can achieve 1.2 to 1.3. Hyperscale purpose-built facilities with liquid cooling and climate-optimized designs can reach 1.1 or lower. This means the age and design of a facility has a direct, computable impact on margin per kilowatt, and older facilities can find themselves structurally cost uncompetitive against newer ones without doing anything operationally wrong. Labor is the second major cost, and the staffing model for a 24-hour critical infrastructure facility is more expensive than most first-time operators expect. A 10-megawatt colocation data center can't run on a small team. You need a 24-hour operations rotation of data center technicians who can respond to customer equipment issues, electricians and mechanical engineers who understand critical systems, a physical security team, and enough management depth that one person's absence doesn't create a single point of failure in operations. 15 to 30 full-time employees for a facility of this scale is realistic in most markets. Annual labor costs of $2 million to $4 million are consistent with that headcount and the technical skill levels required. Maintenance contracts on critical systems add another significant recurring cost. UPS systems, backup generators, precision cooling equipment, and fire suppression systems all require scheduled preventive maintenance, regular load testing, and rapid response service contracts for when something fails at 3 in the morning. Budget $500,000 to $1 million annually for critical systems maintenance on a 10-megawatt facility. Skipping this isn't commercially viable. Enterprise customers require documented maintenance schedules and testing records as contractual conditions of their leases. Property taxes, liability insurance, and administrative overhead add another 5 to 10% of revenue. Physical fiber access costs, because even though customers purchase their own network services, the facility maintains the Meet Me room and cross-connect infrastructure. And then there's the budget line that shows up in every mature facility's financials, but never in a first-year financial model. Unplanned emergency response costs. When a cooling unit fails during a summer heat wave and 200 server racks are at thermal risk, the combination of emergency repair costs, expedited parts, and contractual customer credits is real money, and it arrives without warning. If you've been tracking those numbers, a question should be forming. The revenue line looks real, the cost structure looks real, but where does a company like Equinix, which reported more than $8 billion in 2023 annual revenue across more than 260 data centers in 70 cities, actually make its margin, and can a new entrant replicate it? The answer to the first question is that Equinix's margins are real and genuinely strong. Equinix's EBITDA margin runs approximately 45 to 47% based on its 2023 reported financials. Digital Realty, the other major publicly traded data center REIT, runs 37 to 42% EBITDA margins. These are strong returns on an operating basis. but they're built on compounding advantages that took decades to accumulate. Interconnection ecosystems in 70 cities that attract networks and customers in self-reinforcing cycles. Portfolio diversification across dozens of markets so that one market's downturn doesn't threaten the company. A brand name that enterprise customers' procurement teams use to justify paying a 20 to 30% premium over a cheaper alternative without extensive due diligence. And a cost of capital structure that is structurally different from anything a new independent operator can access. A new single-site colocation operator shouldn't expect those margins. A realistic target for a well-run new facility in years 3 to 5, once lease-up is meaningfully advanced, is 25 to 35% EBITDA margins. That sounds workable until you set it against debt service. A $100 million facility financed at 50% debt, borrowing $50 million at 7% on a 25-year amortization, carries approximately $4 million to $4.5 million per year in total debt service. A facility generating $15 million in year 2 revenue at 35% EBITDA. Margins produces roughly $5.25 million of EBITDA. After debt service, the remaining cash flow is thin. In a year where a large customer gives notice or an equipment failure triggers credits, it's negative. The operators who navigate this period successfully are the ones who went in with enough equity capital to carry the business through the lease-up phase without being forced into a distressed refinancing or an asset sale below replacement cost. The ones who underestimated the lease-up timeline or who levered the project too aggressively relative to their equity cushion are the ones whose lenders ended up owning the facilities at a discount. But there's a structural advantage the large operators have that a new entrant can't replicate through better execution alone, and it deserves to be stated clearly. When Equinix converted to a real estate investment trust structure in 2015, it permanently changed its cost of capital. REITs have access to cheaper equity because of their pass-through tax treatment and their dividend-paying structure, which attracts institutional income investors who require lower expected returns than investors in standard operating companies. That lower cost of capital means Equinix can underwrite a development deal at a lower required return than an independent operator financing through conventional means, which means they can compete for the same assets at higher prices while still meeting their return hurdle. A new independent entrant doesn't have that structural cost advantage. That's not a problem you solve with better execution or a smarter customer acquisition strategy. It's a structural feature of how the capital market for this asset class is organized, built over decades, and it shapes who actually builds the next data center in any given market. You can't talk about data center economics in 2026 without addressing the AI demand surge directly, because it's reshaping the market faster than most analysis accounts for. Training and running large A1 models requires massive compute, which requires massive power, which has to be housed somewhere physical. The numbers behind this are real. Goldman Sachs estimated in 2024 that data center power consumption in the United States could increase by approximately 160% by 2030. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta have collectively announced data center investment programs measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars over the next several years. NVIDIA reported data center segment revenue of $47.5 billion in its fiscal year 2024, up from approximately $15 billion the prior year. That growth came almost entirely from a workload acceleration. These aren't manufactured numbers, but there's something that gets missed in most coverage of the AI data center opportunity for new investors and developers. The demand is real. The constraint is power grid capacity, not buildings. And the companies that can actually build at the scale AI requires are not the companies a new independent operator can compete with. When Microsoft announced approximately $80 billion in AI data center investment for fiscal year 2025, they weren't looking for a small colocation operator to house their training clusters. They were building their own facilities or pre-leasing entire hyperscale campuses from developers who had secured utility commitments years earlier and could deliver 100 megawatts or more at a time. The minimum transaction size for the hyperscale AI market is well above what most first-time developers can participate in, and the customer relationships that drive those transactions were built over years. The AI demand also creates a structural problem for some existing traditional colocation operators that's worth understanding if you're evaluating an existing facility rather than building new. Traditional server racks run at 10 to 20 kilowatts of power density per rack. An AI GPU cluster might need 40 to 100 kilowatts per rack. A facility that was engineered and built for 15 kilowatt rack density cannot be meaningfully retrofitted for 80 kilowatt density without essentially rebuilding the cooling and electrical infrastructure from the floor up. Some existing colocation facilities are finding themselves partially obsolete for the highest growth segment of the market, even while they retain years of useful life for traditional workloads. Where the AI boom genuinely creates accessible opportunity for new entrants is in the businesses surrounding data center development rather than the data centers themselves. Power engineering firms helping developers navigate interconnection queues, fiber deployment and network infrastructure companies, critical systems maintenance contractors who can service the exploding installed base of new facilities, cooling system design and installation specialists for liquid-cooled GPU environments. These are businesses with real demand growth, real skill premiums, and capital requirements that don't start at $100 million per project. There's also a real estate dynamic in the AI build-out that most coverage misses. The hyperscalers, particularly Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta, are now pre-leasing capacity at a scale and pace that effectively locks up the best utility-accessible sites in the best markets before independent developers can compete for them. An experienced developer who secured good sites and utility commitments 4 or 5 years ago is now leasing those sites to AI-driven hyperscale customers at strong rates. A developer trying to enter the market today faces a multi-year power queue, elevated construction costs, and a supply environment where the best customers already have commitments elsewhere. Let's look at two realistic scenarios with real numbers. Not best case and not worst case. One that works and one that shows where the math comes apart. Scenario 1. You have $40 million of equity. You raise $60 million in construction financing. You build a 10 megawatt colocation facility in a secondary market where power is accessible and enterprise demand is real. But you're not competing head-to-head with Equinix in Northern Virginia. Total all-in development costs, $100 million. Your target is 80% occupancy within 4 years, priced at a blended average of $200 per kilowatt per month. At that target occupancy, annual recurring revenue is $19.2 million. At 35% EBITDA margins, that's $6.7 million of EBITDA. Debt service on $60 million at 7% interest on a 25-year amortization runs approximately $5.1 million per year. Net cash flow to equity after debt service, $1.6 million annually. Cash-on-cash return on the $40 million equity investment, roughly 4% per year. That cash return is not exciting in isolation. But data center assets in the stabilized colocation category have historically traded at 18 to 25 times EBITDA. At 20 times EBITDA, on $6.7 million of stabilized EBITDA, the implied total asset value is $134 million against a $100 million cost basis. The equity portion, after paying off the $60 million of debt, is approximately $74 million against the $40 million you invested. The cash flow is modest. The capital appreciation, if you reach stabilization on the timeline you modeled, is meaningful. This business is less about monthly income and more about building an asset. Scenario 2. Same facility, same market. But the lease-up takes 6 years instead of 4 because supply in the market outpaced demand when you opened, or because a well-capitalized competitor entered and absorbed the customers you were projecting. In year 3, you're at 40% occupancy. Revenue is $9.6 million. EBITDA at 35% margins is $3.4 million. Debt service is still $5.1 million. You're cash flow negative by $1.7 million. That shortfall gets funded from your equity reserves. In year 4, 55% occupancy. $13.2 million of revenue, $4.6 million of EBITDA, still short of debt service coverage by roughly $500,000. By the time you reach target occupancy in year 6, you've consumed $7 million to $10 million of your original equity cushion just funding the cash flow gap during the extended ramp-up period. The building works. The customers are there. But the timeline consumed capital you hadn't fully budgeted for. Your financial position is more leveraged than your original model. and you've spent 6 years getting to a stabilized return that scenario one reached in four. The difference between scenario one and scenario two isn't the quality of the asset or the diligence of the operator. Both facilities are operationally identical. The difference is market timing and competitive dynamics. Two things you can influence at the margin and cannot control. Unlike some commodity businesses where future pricing has hedging instruments, the colocation lease-up timeline has almost no effective risk transfer mechanism available to a smaller independent operator. You can try to pre-lease before you build, but getting pre-lease commitments from creditworthy customers before a facility exists requires relationships and a track record that most first-time developers don't have. You're building speculatively and hoping the market cooperates. Here's what data center ownership actually is. Once you remove the narrative about the AI gold rush and the guaranteed infrastructure demand, it's a business where the entry cost starts at $70 million for a facility small enough to question whether it's commercially viable on its own, where the revenue ramp takes years, not quarters, where your biggest input cost is a utility commodity tied to grid dynamics and weather patterns you don't control, where your best customers have constructed their lease negotiations to give you as little pricing power as possible because they know you built the facility before they committed, and where the companies that built competitive moats over 25 years have structural cost advantages, specifically their real estate investment trust cost of capital and their interconnection ecosystems developed across dozens of markets that you simply cannot replicate by opening one facility. The technology demand is real. The infrastructure shortage is real. The investment opportunity is real, but it flows to capital that can operate at scale, survive long lease-up periods on strong equity cushions, and build or acquire multiple assets to create the portfolio diversification that makes a business financially durable through the periods when the market doesn't cooperate. Some data centers make a lot of money. Equinix has made shareholders very wealthy across 25 years. Digital Realty is a multi-billion-dollar business. The math works at scale, and it works because of compounding capital cost advantages and decades of ecosystem density that don't exist at year one of a first facility. The people who succeed here aren't the ones who found a market with AI demand and assumed the demand would fill the building. They're the ones who went in with enough capital to survive the lease-up, who picked markets where they had a specific and defensible reason to exist, and who understood from the beginning that this is fundamentally a real estate and power logistics business, not a technology business. The data has to live somewhere. Getting paid to store it is a lot harder than the pitch deck makes it look. If you enjoyed this, give it a like and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe for more.